Welcome to this second episode about high functioning anxiety. The first episode was all about the red flags, the symptoms, how to spot it in yourself and others. So if you hadn't had a listen to that, it's last week's episode. Have a little listen because then this episode will make a lot more sense. This week, we're still talking high functioning anxiety, but we're talking about some solutions as well. So let's get straight into it. Let's just have a quick recap of the signs of high functioning anxiety in equestrianism specifically. If you're listening on the podcast, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. But if you want to see the slides that I'm sharing, they're on YouTube. You don't need to because I'm going to describe them, but if you're a visual learner, you might want to. So the world of high performance sport and even, recreational equestrianism is a perfect breeding ground for this type of anxiety, unfortunately, because the same drive that you have to keep you riding, maybe competing and moving forwards, that can also, in a way, be your downfall. Because that drive that keeps you going is also fueling anxiety and tension. Now, somebody who is a high functioning anxiety person will constantly monitor themselves. They overanalyze everything they do. They are very often in a perfectionist trap. And very often their conscious mind overrides their unconscious mind. So what I mean by this is, imagine somebody who is a show jumper and they can do their strides by feel. They don't have to count strides. They don't have to do anything. They feel the horse's motion. They know where they are in relation to the jump, and they know where the horse is taking off. And they've done this because, or they've got this in their mind because they've done it thousands of times. And it's second nature and it's automatic and it's a skill that they've honed. But sometimes with high functioning anxiety, the conscious mind then kicks in. And the conscious mind says something like, I've got to get the stride right, got to be perfect, got to get the takeoff right, got to do this, I've got to be right, got to be perfect, got to get over the jump, can't have four faults. And because that conscious mind is almost, pecking in your ear, then all that unconscious training and skill just kind of flies out of the window, or you get in the way of your skill and you ignore it. And so it's really difficult. Some people in that kind of mindset end up making mistakes for something that they absolutely know how to do. High functioning anxiety people also push themselves not just beyond their mental and emotional limits, but sometimes beyond their physical limits too. So they ignore pain, they risk injury, they'll get on with a broken bone, because they have to train, because the world or the sky will collapse if they don't train. And so they push constantly. So what's the root cause? It's not the anxiety itself. So if you were to go and get some stress reduction or some kind of anxiety alleviation, that will help. So if you do something like yoga or mindfulness, or you go for a walk, then that will all be to the good. But underneath, we've got a root cause. And the root cause is when you haven't got something called motivational coherence. So this is when your conscious intention, so the goal that you've set yourself, Even it could be a goal for the next ride. It doesn't have to be a long-term goal. It could be, the goal for the next 10 minutes. So your intention there that you know about, it's in your conscious mind, that is in conflict somehow with unconscious rules. And unconscious rules are things like we say to ourselves, I should be able to do that, or I must ride every day. I need to make sure I make the team. You'll hear those very harsh words used because that's a rule for somebody. And when we break our own rules, we feel bad. We feel anxious, or we feel bad in some other way. So rules will be things that are quite deep set. They may be things that a person with high functioning anxiety doesn't share with others. They think, I better not say that. Better not say I must or I should. But they'll be there. There are other styles of rules. For example, there might be a style of rule where you have some kind of outcome that you don't want. If I don't ride every day, X will happen. And again, maybe something that isn't shared, but this is another rule. Or being nervous means I don't ride well. Being non-competitive means I'm not a good rider. So there's all of these rules that may be hidden from friends, hidden from the outside, but we know ourselves that they're there. So the first thing to do is to root out the root of the problem, to root out these goals. So if you suspect that you have high functioning anxiety, the first thing to do is to think, when do I say I should? Connected with my riding, when do I say to myself I should? And what's it about? I should be able to do this by now? Or is it something else? Or what are my musts? What must I do? And when do I say to myself I need to? And when do I say to myself there's a bad consequence if I don't ride, or if I don't compete, or if I don't go on that hack? When do I have that negative consequence? And just write them down. Just explore the shoulds, the musts, the have tos, the need tos, those bad consequences, or when you equate something that other people may say, well, that's not equal, just because somebody doesn't compete doesn't make them an ineffective rider. So think about those things as well. When you've got this means this, and you think to yourself, well, that's a little bit harsh, but I can be harsh on myself. Those are the kind of phrases that I'm talking about. So notice when you say those phrases, because they are underpinning the anxiety. So what we need to do is address the root cause. We need to address those rules. We need to ask ourselves, for what purpose? For what purpose must we do this? What will happen if I do? What will happen if I don't? So we can rewrite the rules so that it feels more natural to have that choice. So the issue isn't exactly what we're doing. The issue isn't necessarily the anxiety, it's the root cause behind it. Let me give you a little example and see if you recognize yourself or somebody else. So somebody may have a set of unconscious rules, and I'm going to give you an example. And this example is, I am only worthy if I'm busy at all times. So this rule has been linked with their identity. That's how they see themselves. So if anything contravenes that identity, they might start to feel threatened, or they might start to feel very uncomfortable. So this person believes that their self-worth is directly linked to their output, and possibly to their visible effort. Do they need to be seen to be busy as well? They need to tell everybody, I started work at 6 and I didn't finish till 8. And do they need other people to know that? Now, they know that at this point or at some point they have a need for rest. So either they're cajoled into it or they accept themselves that they need a break and they take a break. And be that an afternoon or a week or a weekend, they decide to take a break. But then that unconscious rule starts to kick in. I am only worthy if I'm busy at all times. So this person, they may be lying on a beach, or maybe they're just at home, they've got a good book, they've lined up a webinar that they've really wanted to watch, but they've been far too busy to watch previously. So now they're doing their rest, but their core identity is being challenged. They're in violation of their own rule. So the brain says, oh, you're breaking a rule here. I'm going to send you an error message because you're not busy. So that means you're not worthy. So the brain sends an error message, and it does this by making you feel physically maybe very, very restless. So you sit down and you don't feel at ease, you don't feel relaxed. You may actually feel like you need to move. Then mentally, you start to think about the things that you should or could be doing. What about that email that you haven't answered yet? That doesn't need to be answered for 6 weeks, but you could be busy. You could get in there and start being busy again. And so you start to think, but I might forget it if I don't do it. And I feel really guilty because I'm not doing it. And you get to a point where this is overwhelming. And so what happens is you start to feel guilt. You start to feel that maybe other people are going to overtake you in some way. So to get out of it, to stop feeling so bad, you get busy. And it often leads to people who have high functioning anxiety not resting. They avoid rest because it makes them feel so uncomfortable physically and mentally and emotionally. So they avoid it because they just don't want that discomfort. So there is this conflict all the time with anxiety and tension and restlessness if they aren't busy because they're breaking their own rule. But if we know what the rule is, and we've identified it as I should do this, and in this case it was I'm only worthy if I'm busy at all times, then we can start to break that rule down and think to ourselves, is that a rule worth having? Does that make any sense? A lot of these rules don't actually make any sense. Sometimes the rules come from somebody else. You may find that you're copying maybe a parent or somebody who was influential when you were younger, and you've picked up on their strategies and their habits. In which case you sort of think, well, no, that belonged to them, and that wasn't me. And in knowing this, it helps you to break down these rules so that you can start to think of new rules that are far more choice-driven, more open-ended, more flexible, more workable, and certainly don't lead to anxiety. So you may want to just ponder on your own personal rules, question them, make sure that they're loosened up significantly. But if you want to do something a little bit stronger, if you feel that you're properly mired in high functioning anxiety, you could book in with an NLP coach or a hypnotherapist. Timeline therapy also works very, very beautifully. I'm going to give you a few ideas of what that would entail. if you wanted to go ahead with something like NLP or timeline or hypnosis. So these techniques, hypnosis and NLP, allow us to get into the part of the mind that holds the rules. So we can bypass what's called the critical faculty barrier, or we can, in other words, bypass the conscious mind that normally blocks us and get to the root of the problem. And for a client with high functioning anxiety, we may also use something called pattern interrupt. So this means that we break the link between their sense of worth or their sense of identity or their idea of what brings them success and their anxiety. And in some ways, analysing the rules that I've just mentioned will help you to do that. You can notice more and more when that rule is coming to a head and you think, but that's nonsense. I can be successful and take a break. They're not mutually exclusive. So we can think about keeping the person feeling safe and comfortable whilst also breaking their rules. We can also, in terms of loosening that rule, use things like metaphors, visualizations. Visualizations you can do for yourself. You visualize yourself doing the new habit. So whether that's resting or turning the emails off at 5 o'clock, turning your phone off at 7 o'clock, you visualize yourself doing it. So you watch yourself doing it. And as you visualize, you see it, but you also might hear it. You might hear yourself shut down your computer. You might hear yourself turn off the phone. You might be able to feel what it's like to press the keys or use the mouse on the computer, or to use the touch screen on your iPad or your device, your phone. And so you've got some touch, you've got some sound, you've got some visuals, and to a greater or lesser extent, depending on what you prefer doing when you're thinking about it. I know lots of people say to me they struggle with seeing. Well, don't worry. If it's grey and blobby and misty, don't worry. That's your visualization. Make sure you've got some touch and you've got some sounds, and you've also got some kind of personalized mantra or saying, something like, I feel safe to rest, or it's safe to rest. It's more productive to rest. But make up your own, because that will link in with your mind rather than me directing you to a particular sentence. So as hypnotherapists, as timeline therapists, as NLP practitioners, master practitioners, then we can start to give you suggestions, which may be hidden. We can introduce a new story, and that story is about being safe and calm. Rest is productive, and success is not fear. It's not constant fear. So there is no link between these two. The last thing that somebody might be able to coach you through is anchoring, because anchoring gives you the state, the emotional state that you'd like to be in when you want to be in it. So we can install new resourceful states. So maybe it is calm when you want to be calm and you want to be restful. Maybe it's confidence. It'll be very personalized what you want to feel. And then you can access that later when you actually need that calm or that confidence in a very challenging moment. So I hope this has given you a few pointers. There are lots of other things that you can do. For instance, you can do some self-hypnosis. You can do some timeline work, which I've not really mentioned at all. That's incredibly powerful. But what I would say is see what you can break down for yourself in terms of your own mental rules. See how far you can get. And if that breaks the pattern, that's wonderful. And if it doesn't, see a coach, because they really will help you, maybe in only 1 or 2 sessions, to get over this. So if you have any questions, do let me know. And if you want to know more about this style of anxiety, or more about timeline therapy, or anything else that I've mentioned, just send me a quick message. My contact details are down in the description box. So take care. I'll see you again soon, and thanks for listening.